If your Canadian ancestors were among the 1.5 million immigrants who arrived in Canada from Europe between 1928 and 1971, it is more than likely that Pier 21 in Halifax was where they first stepped foot on Canadian soil. And if your father, grandfather, or great grandfather served in Europe in World War II, it was the port they left Canada from. And for many, it is where their last steps on Canadian soil would be made. And for those who did return, it is where they were greeted by thankful crowds of children and where some of their European brides first met their new families. It is where refugees during World War II were welcomed, yet some were turned away. After being displaced in their own countries because of the land and the economies were both ravaged by the war, immigrants arrived in greater numbers than before to a new country with a new hope. Today, the only arrivals in Halifax by sea are tourists whose cruise ship dock at the seaport where the immigrant ships once moored. When I lived in Halifax for university, the pier had long been abandoned. Well, 17 years really isn't that long, I guess. But the area around the pier had become run down and was one of the seedier sections of the city. And I never went there unless it was to go to the nearby train station. At that time, I had known the important role that those ramshackle old buildings played in Canadian history. Luckily, others did. In 1985, 3 years before I started university, the Pier 21 Society was founded by J.P. LeBlanc. He was the final superintendent of immigration at Pier 21. The purpose of the society was to raise funds and renew the public's interest in the derelict sheds. Cape Breton turned philanthropist Ruth Goldblum became the organization's second president in 1993. Her parents and grandparents had immigrated from Russia through Pier 21, and their stories influenced her life. She spearheaded the push to turn Pier 21 into a national historical site and a museum. Her plan proceeded quickly, and 6 years later, on Canada Day in 1999, Pier 21 was reopened as a museum, and it began its new role to celebrate the 1.5 million immigrants who passed through its doors. And on June 25, 2009, Prime Minister Stephen Harper announced a statement of intentions to designate it a National Museum of Immigration to be located at Pier 21. I recently visited the museum and I want to share with you about this historic place that is now a valuable resource for learning about 20th century Canadian immigration and about how it is saving the stories of those that came and went through Pier 21. And I want to help share their stories that contribute to our history, culture, and society so that we can have a better understanding of how we got here. My guide for this visit was Carrie Ann Smith. She currently serves as the Vice President of Audience Engagement at the Canadian Museum of Immigration at Pier 21. She joined the Pier 21 Society back in the summer of 1988 and has watched the organization grow and evolve from an idea into an interpretive center and now a national museum. She's busy with many different roles at the museum, but this day she proved that collecting and sharing stories has always and still is one of her favorite things to do. and I want to thank her for all she did to accommodate me and share her knowledge to make this visit both educational and enjoyable. So the main part of the museum is upstairs, and when you first walk into the exhibit hall, you're presented with this very well done, detailed model of how the Immigration Center looked when it was active between 1928 and 1971. As you walk around the model, it details each section of the building from when you as an immigrant would first arrive until you would leave the building to board a train to go to your new home. And the great thing about this is also very similar into the way that the museum itself is broken up into sections, with each section not just representing a physical part of the building, but also the actual process that an immigrant would go through as they worked through the process of from arrival to leaving.
So, whilst you're here, you explain a little bit about this luggage here.
Yeah, it's a nice range of luggage. What I like about it is when people come back to the museum, they can almost always find a piece that resembles what they arrived with. So it shows the whole range of experience, from the little paper suitcases. That one up there belonged to a Jewish war orphan called Helena Hertzman. And those paper suitcases were given to people by the International Refugee Organization, to this trunk here, which doesn't look super fancy, but that was Galen Weston's trunk when he was a little boy. And his father, Garfield Weston, had already, made a fortune in the UK when they immigrated. So that's very unique in the Pier 21 experience, because most people are coming to Canada for opportunities and education and a better life. But they were doing great in England, and then they came here and just kept doing great. A favorite piece of mine is this little metal case here. It came from a man called Jan Jurkiewicz, and he was very lucky and survived the war, and at the end of the war was in the American zone in Berlin. And he got a job driving the American GIs. So like everybody else, he's in a displaced persons camp, applies with the IRO, and is waiting to see who's going to let him in, Canada or America or Australia. So he's driving the GIs, he's learning a little bit of English, and one day he gets a letter at the camp from a cousin in the United States that his father has found. And the cousin says, Jan, you don't have to wait for Canada or America or Australia. I'll sponsor you. You can come right away to America. But when you get here, there's a nice Polish girl you have to marry. And he said, I was a prisoner for the last 4 years. I'm going to wait for Canada. And a week later, he got permission to come to Canada. And the American GI said, you need to arrive like a gentleman, because he didn't have a suitcase. So they went in the back of the Jeep and they emptied out that equipment case and they gave it to him. And so here comes Jan to Canada with his case, he had one Polish to English dictionary, one Sir Arthur Conan Doyle book, and a toothbrush. And he always said, when he got to Pier 21, the first thing he saw was a poster that said, drink Canada dry. And his joke was, I've been trying to ever since. A fun piece that I use as kind of an excuse to talk about the difference in the way the immigrants were processed to the way the war brides were processed. Yep. So the war brides married Canadian servicemen in the Second World War, and when they come, it's during that period, it's 1946, when the Department of National Defense is still running Pier 21, and all of their crossings are paid for and organized by the Department of National Defense. So they're in, And when Sylvia McDonald comes, they're kind of just ushering the brides through and not doing all the rigor they would with the immigrants. So at customs, instead of making her unpack the case, the customs officer just says to Sylvia, is there anything in your case that shouldn't be? And she says, of course not. And off she goes onto the train. When she gets to her in-laws in Canada and opens up the trunk, unbeknownst to her, her husband had filled it with German machine guns. Can you imagine?
So that sign looks like it's probably one of the last signs that was in here.
Yes, manpower and immigration is definitely late in the period. And the picture beside it is really nice for showing how all the Portlands, everything was built at the same time. So the piers were built, the old Nova Scotian Hotel and the train station all went up at the same time. And you can see it's the West End Hotel now, and where they have a giant parking lot used to be a beautiful rose garden. So in one of the immigration officer's diaries, he talks about, you know, if he was having a stressful day, he would just go and sit in the rose garden.
It's amazing.
Yeah, this part of the exhibition is about life on the ship and all kinds of sample menus and the sorts of activities people did. Everyone says the food was amazing. It just sounds like the entire experience was dictated by whether or not you were seasick. If you were seasick, it was horrible and there was nothing you could do about it, and you didn't start feeling better until you sat on the benches at Pier 21. But for people who felt good, 3 beautiful meals a day, which meant a huge amount to people after rationing, and activities. There were dances at night, and there were tea parties for the kids. Most of the ships had like these really fabulous playrooms for the children. And in that picture there, the kids are playing shuffleboard on the deck. There was always a lifeboat drill. A lot of people took pictures of the lifeboat drills. Yeah, a lot of fun if you felt good. I can't remember what ship it was, but I love the story a man donated to our collection about his ship having a movie theater.
Wow.
And he's coming in the post-war years as a refugee, and they showed Snow White. And he just talks about, like, just so to him that became Canada. That was the potential.
It's funny. A German fairy tale told by an American.
That is
who was
funny.
originally from Canada. Well, not originally.
I didn't know that. That's wonderful. I'm going to look it up.
Yeah, his father was from Canada, I believe.
Wow. That is very cool. And these are the 100 ships that came the most times. These are the busy ships, and a lot of them here, you know, monthly in the 1950s. Saturnian Vulcania. I feel like half of the Italian people we met came on one of the 2 of them.
So what was the traffic like post-war? Immediately, I imagine it was quite busy here.
Busy. It was very busy. They were receiving ships sometimes even in the middle of the night. The staff and the volunteer talk about getting called in, and there's photographs with 3 ships along the pier. It's quite long, and then one could be in the slip. So they would just bring people off the ship in groups of a couple hundred and process them, and then bring the next group through.
Awesome. Wow. I think it's great that you have the things to prompt people to, you know.
That's right. And again, like I said, these are just the 100 busiest.
Yeah.
When the 100,000 displaced people came between 47 and 51, they came on Liberty boats. So they're not on this wall because they didn't come enough times, but we have background on them and stories from passengers who came on them and pictures of them, and all of that's in the Scotiabank Family History Center. So we're always trying to send people down there because the exhibition really is the tip of the iceberg. We've been collecting memoirs since the late 90s. So after 1935, the immigration records are still sealed. People have a right to their own. They can access the record of a deceased relative after 20 years. But if they know the date,
They can find
we've
the
got
general.
the arrival schedule, and there's a good chance we might have 3 stories from other people who made the same crossing. And sometimes those stories are illustrated by group photos on the deck, so you just never know. I have had people who came in not knowing anything find a picture of their relative in one of those
Wow.
fabulous shots that everybody loved to take up on the deck with, you know, the kids in the middle holding the life preserver. So you never know. It's living history. It literally walks in every day, and people have found themselves in photographs in this exhibition and in the original Pier 21 exhibition. It happened quite frequently.
Wow.
Our curator, David Conlon, designed this great immersive of a very typical post-war cabin. It's a little bit wider than it would have been to make it accessible, but it gives you that sense of what the quarters were like. Little sink, but the bathrooms were communal. So of the 100 busiest ships, this is the Ascania. She was the absolute most frequent caller at Pier 21.
And it was British, obviously.
Yeah, little Cunard, one funnel. But just back and forth, back and forth. Back in the day when, you know, for commercial shipping profits, they were built for speed, not for comfort like now. No stabilizers, no casinos. They went fast, but a lot of people got sick. They like this beautiful little trunk with the rounded top, and that was indicative of people that had money, because if your suitcase had a rounded top, they couldn't put anybody else's suitcase on it, so it was always on top of the stevedores carts. And since the 90s, we've had this piece, Dirk Leegwater's suitcase. So they were Dutch farmers, and they settled in Nova Scotia. And just 2 weeks ago, Jacob and Jerry Leegwater, two of the children in the family, came back to Pier 21 on the exact day, April 9th, of their 75th anniversary of arriving. And it was amazing. We've got pictures of them in front of the trunk, and we have their story.
So I've seen these books at different places throughout the exhibit.
Yeah, he built 5 of these little immersive children's trunks. So because when we did the second exhibition, like I said, we've been collecting memoirs and oral history interviews for years. So I picked 5 people that I was already friends with so that they could tell me about their experiences, and I could choose the props for the trunks based on their stories. So this is Ariella Del Fara's trunk, and she's got the fabulous monkey puppet. These are all just replicas, so kids can play with them. And when they were coming from Italy, so we had like her ticket in the collection, and her father had taken all these amazing shots. Her mom, Rena, was a seamstress, so she made all their gorgeous little traveling clothes. So there's Miss Rena, so I wanted to replicate those. And her strongest memory of the crossing was when they were going past Gibraltar, and the men from Gibraltar came out in the rowboats alongside the ship, and the passengers would send money down to buy things from the men from Gibraltar. So the father bought them the monkey puppet, but also like people were hoisting up bananas to the passengers. And that's the picture her dad took of like exactly when that was happening.
Wow.
And then we'll just flip to the end, because she has a really rare thing. People took lots of pictures on the deck and in the dining room, but there's almost none from inside the cabin. So that's one of the pictures that we used to help inform Dan Conlon's immersive of the ship captain. And this is on the day they arrived, and that's Halifax in the background.
I bet you how much a suitcase can hold is.
Oh, as much as humanly possible. In this exhibition and in Canadian Immigration Hall, yeah, we talk about like just those agonizing decisions about what to bring and what not to bring, and trying to bring as much as possible. We talk a lot about intangible history. What do you bring in your heart? What do you bring with your culture and your faith and your stories and your lullabies? I love this picture. There was a Herald photographer called Wetmore, and I have this theory that every time it was a slow news day, he would just come down to Pier 21 and photograph the children, because he has so many pictures that are this good. And in some of them, it looks like at customs, he asked the kids to put on their traditional dress.
Okay.
There's a fabulous picture where he has 7 Dutch sisters in white dresses lined up by height at the immigration desk. Beautiful work. And that we partnered with the Herald, and a lot of his pictures are on our website. If people want to check them out, they are gorgeous.
It's okay.
We put these pictures here because this is just to help people get that sense of what happened. So we're on the upper level, which is where the gangway attached from the ship and funneled people into the immigration hall. The best views, I think, in the whole city, and this area is set aside to look at the building during the war years. So Department of National Defense operating it between 39 and 47, convoys assembling in the Bedford Basin, a very different period than the immigration years, but a lot of important.
What about non-war related immigration between 45 and 47?
Pretty much stops. There are a couple of people, but yeah, it basically comes to a standstill with the exception. So this is my girlfriend, Maggie Morris Smolensky, and she was a British evacuee child in 1940 who came through Pier 21. So that was a scheme conceived by Geoffrey Shakespeare in British Parliament when he realized that rich British children were being evacuated and poor British children were being bombed. So the idea was that parents could apply and have their children sent to safety in the colonies during the war. It was very popular. Thousands of children were coming in 1940. A ship called Volendam was bringing children and got torpedoed off the British coast. They made it back to port, but then the parents had to decide, does this mean too dangerous with the U-boat peril on the North Atlantic and we keep the kids at home? Or some thought, no, this just reinforces that we want them safely in Canada. And so some parents took the kids home, some parents put the kids on the next vessel, which was the city of Benares, and she was torpedoed and sunk. 77 children died. That was the end of the scheme. The kids who were in Canada were here right through the end of the war, and no more came because it was so dangerous. But the kids were here for almost 5 years. So when you think of sending away a 5-year-old and they come back a 10-year-old, Maggie was 19 by the end of the war and went back to England, as a woman. When the parents were sending the kids, everybody was still thinking 6 months. This'll wrap up in about 6 months. So there's some stories of parents not recognizing their kids
I could
at
imagine.
the train station. And there's a story that I like about a teenager who came of age in Canada, and then he told his parents in London, don't come to the train station to meet me, I'll make my way home. So he's not expecting them to be there. And he's in a crowd and he's having a cigarette, and then he just hears his mother's voice say, oh my God, it's John, and he's smoking. Love this. You probably got a sense from especially those pictures that it was a shed. We still call it a shed. It was a shed. It was meant to be temporary. It was never beautiful like Ellis Island, which was meant to be a palace. But after the war, and we don't know who, someone hung just this very modest wooden sign, but with those incredibly evocative words, welcome home to Canada. And we have an employment program that we've had since 2004, where we give new Canadians their first Canadian work experience and reference, and that program is called Welcome Home to Canada. I just think that's such a beautiful sentiment. And another set of original wooden doors. And then when we get into this part, that's where you get a sense of what this room looked like. So the whole exhibition is in the original Pier 21 Assembly Hall. So just this big room full of benches, and people would just wait their turns and get called up to talk to the immigration officer. A pretty smooth process because everyone has already got permission to come. They've done their physical exams, they have their chest x-rays and their vaccination certificates. They've done their immigration interview in their first language, in their country of origin. So it's really just like all this video shows. This was all shot in this room. The immigration officers are just making sure everything's okay. One of the kids hasn't come down with rubella. You still have an employer, you've got a train ticket, you have a plan. So for most people, it's only about 3 hours from the ship to the train.
Wow.
I had mentioned little Jerry Leaguewater, so we're going to see her in 1 minute go up to the immigration officer with her father. He's just asking him the same questions that he'd already answered. Everything is good. All the papers are in order. And get your landed immigrant stamp. And you're off to small baggage customs in the Padway, and then large baggage customs. When people didn't speak English, they would put those tags on their coat with their destination. So if you got off the train in Montreal or you got turned around anywhere, somebody could get you
To the right
get
place.
you back on the road to the right place. Yep. More Dutch people, obviously. The little wicker basket with the baby in it.
Wow.
This is a very famous National Archives photo. We don't know if it was taken in 28 or 29, and we've never had anyone find a relative in it, or recognize somebody, but it's so big that could happen, and it did happen with this picture from the 60s where, maybe about 3 years ago, a man called Tony was visiting, and then he said, that's my dad, and that's my mom, and that's my uncle, and that's my aunt. And then he went back home and told the family and took tons of pictures of it. And the next summer, he brought his mom back. He had lost his father, but it was really nice for his mom to get to see it, and she posed in front of it. Now, the person that I'm waiting to find is a grandchild or a great-grandchild of this little boy. Somebody knows. Somebody knows who he is.
Doesn't he look like a...
I
he's a
just
character?
love him. I just love him.
I can't-
Everybody else is sitting down. Eh?
Oh.
He's the one, that was probably running circles around the room. But, there's pictures on the website, on a page called Are You in This Picture? Where I put like a whole bunch of group photos because it's living history, so that's the joy of it. In this trunk is Ozma Laval's trunk. So we were talking about the post-war years. It took between 45 and 47 for us to start welcoming the people from the displaced persons camp. And it was really industry that won the day because they needed the labor. So by 1949, we're feeling pretty good about ourselves because we've let in 50,000 displaced people. So when the Samaria is coming, they pick this little Latvian girl, 8-year-old Ozma Lavalts, and they name her the 50,000th displaced person. And then when she gets to Pier 21, they do like a big media event with her. And that's her life preserver. They hung that around her neck, and she was given gifts from the mayor and the immigration officials, a book about birds, a big doll, a little necklace. So there's clips in that trunk from her oral history interviews where she talks about what for her was a really intimidating experience. And when you watch, there's video on the loop of her, she just smiles and curtsies. That's what her mom said to do, and that's all she does. And then the media kept following her. So very often in those cases, like her father and her teenage brother Jan went first to the farm, and then her mother and her sister and Ozma followed. So they videotaped the reunion with her father and her brother, and they followed her on the first day of school, and it's all in this great NFB footage.
So this is the picture. Nobody knows who
This
this
is the picture. Yeah, so it's Dutch immigrants. It was taken in 28 or 29, but no one has recognized anyone yet. And that makes sense because that's pretty early on.
Yeah.
It's not as easy as finding people from the 50s and the 60s, but like, can you, so just look at that, like one picture and how many people are in it. How many Canadians today are descended from one of those people?
Especially with Dutch families.
Big families. Big families. The biggest one I know of is the Schultons. They had 21 kids. Now, because everyone's processed in Europe, very low deportation rate, but sometimes things go wrong. So this area is about when people lived in the detention, in accommodation and detention quarters. So if people arrived illegally, they would live in detention while things were sorted out and they were either given or denied permission to stay. The displaced people all had labor contracts for 1 year, so the government pays to bring them, but then you're going to Timmins or Sudbury or the Sioux, you're gonna go and do your labor contract for a year, and then you can do whatever you want. When the Hungarian Revolution failed, and Jack Pickersgill was the head of immigration, he flew to Vienna and started giving out visas because they needed to evacuate people very quickly. So those men didn't have jobs. So this trunk is an homage to my friend Tibor Lukács because they lived here for like 8 months when he was a boy, and his father saved money, bought a house in the south end of Halifax. When he gets here, the immigration officers say, you know what, your job fell through, you stay here, let us make some calls, we'll find some place where you can apprentice. And that's exactly what happens. And then at the end of the week, they're putting him on the train to his new employer that they found, and they gave him a letter. And a letter basically says, you know, we've been very happy to host you for the last week, and not right away, but when you get on your feet and you have a little bit of money, if you could send us $8, that would help us help more people. So the man settles where he settles, Gordon, and he's living his life, and he gets busy, and he just, you know, he never thinks to send the money. Well, it bothers him. He feels bad by the time he realizes it. You know what I mean? Pier 21, the guys are working at the airport. Pier 21 is closed. So on Canada Day in 1999, he's watching CBC and they broadcast our opening ceremonies. And he's like, that's it, I'm doing it. And he like calls and then he arranges to come for a visit. And he like literally put $8 in the donation box. I have pictures of him doing it. It was priceless. He just wanted that peace of mind. It always bothered him that he had never paid that $8. That's the Lady Nelson. When I was managing the library years ago, a man came into the library called Mark Woodrow, and he said, oh, you know, I'm retired and I'm a model builder. And I had just like props on the bookshelves, just in between the books, because at that time we had no acquisition budget. We only had donated books. So I was just trying to make it look kind of warm and filled in. And he said, you know, if you maybe give me the names of 5 ships that you would like to have a model of, I'll see what I can find the plans for. So we settled on the Lady Nelson. He had the plans, and she's a great ship because she was a hospital ship during the war, so wounded service personnel came back on her, and quite a few war brides, and he thought that would be a feasible project. 1 year, so I'm expecting a model that I'm gonna put on a bookshelf, and 1 year later, he arrived with the Lady Nelson.
That's several bookshelves.
We had to have the caves built around it. I just couldn't believe it, the level of detail. He makes his own molds, he cuts all the wood, like look at every floor plank, the little stairs with the railing. It's just stunning, stunning work.
Wow.
So what an amazing, amazing gift for us. And he has pieces in other museums, and it's his passion. tables and chairs. There must have been there was a film event last night.
Okay.
They were talking about customs and confiscated food. Food is the theme of our next traveling exhibition. It is just universal and timeless. Everybody, wherever you go, you want to bring your favorite food. Sometimes you get it into that country, sometimes you don't. Most of the stories that I hear about the post-war years are about people who like succeeded. Like literally one lady was standing in line to go through customs, and a man tapped her on the shoulder and gestured this like swinging motion, and she had sausage links wrapped around her waist, but they had come free and they were swinging, and she just tucked them back up into her skirt, and her theory was that no one would look up a lady's dress, and they didn't, and she got the sausages in. They would now, but it worked. Another big Dutch family, that's the Van Halverts. And this is the 1950s, are a busy period for Dutch farmers coming, and most of them bringing, again, this is a Dan Conlon replica of a very typical Dutch kist. So because they're selling farms and they're coming to Canada, but the Dutch government, whose economy has been devastated during the occupation, doesn't want the money to leave the country. So they can't bring out more than about $200. So they build these giant wooden kists, and they convert the money from the sale of the farm to goods. Things that they're gonna need when they get their own farm in Canada. So household objects, literally kitchen sinks, beds, bicycles, always dishes, always books, pots and pans. The kists were so big that lots of them became chicken coops on the farm in Canada, and one was so big that it became a garage. And in Albert Vandermeer's book, To All Our Children, about the Dutch-Canadian experience, I've never met someone who did this, but he talks about families who brought prefabricated homes.
Wow.
Yeah, from the Netherlands to Canada.
Who said you can't take it with you?
That's right. The whole house, the kitchen sink.
I was going to say, that did not look Dutch.
No. That's the Portuguese one,
Yes.
right? Yeah. The little store, just a modest replica of some of the things in the little store, which was devastating to people because, say, they take away your good cheese and your good prosciutto, and now you've got to go to the little store to buy the food for the train because there was no food on the train. And it was literally like Wonder Bread, Spam meat, peanut butter, Cheese Whiz. It was not a good first impression for people who were used to, like German people used to like hearty brown breads, and Italian people certainly used to good crusty bread, and everyone called it mangia cake and hated it. There's a story, a man who came as a little boy from Germany, and they went to the cafeteria at Pier 21, and they got hot dogs, which they thought were gonna be like German sausage, and then they saw the good brown mustard, so they're pretty excited. Sausage with the good brown mustard, what's not to like? So they put the mustard on, and they start eating the hot dogs, and they can't believe how terrible they are, and then someone tells them, it's not mustard, it's peanut butter. Especially in the early years, are going to go to a telegraph office and send a telegraph ahead to people at their destination to let them know that they're coming, and then it's on to the train. Almost everyone is getting on a train. Even if you're staying in Nova Scotia, you're probably going to take the train to your town. So again, a super accurate replica by Dan Conlon, but made wider for accessibility, so it looks a lot bigger than it actually would have been in the colonist car. And in every photograph, all the little sleeping berths are just full of people's possessions. So people are sleeping sitting up or on the floor and just kind of making the best of the space that they're in. And again, you just have to imagine it full of like humanity, freezing in the winter, boiling in the summer, everyone covered in coal dust because there was a coal stove in every car so that people could heat up soups and bottles for babies and things like that. And you're looking at, anywhere from a couple of hours to 5 days It took 5 days to get to Vancouver. A lot of the people that we meet are going to central Canada, so that's 2 days on the train, which was enough time to make a big impression. And the phrase that we hear the most from people is that they were looking out the window just saying, like, where are the people? Where are all the people? It's just so big. And the size of the country, I think, was very unexpected for a lot of people. So different from Europe. No spitting.
Sorry.
Right through, from 1928 right through 1971, the Canadian Red Cross operated a nursery at Pier 21. So maybe when the parents are doing, some of the processing it was on the other side of the street, across the pedway in the immigration annex, then they will drop off the little ones and they can have a nap, and there were always toys and milk and cookies and things like that while their parents were doing the paperwork. And I have heard tell of, they had a lot of teenage girls volunteering, that they would get overly enthusiastic and just like scoop up babies. So people would turn around and their baby would be gone, and then they would find them in the nursery, accidentally abducted by a well-meaning volunteer. Salvation Army was a regular presence, and of course the Sisters of Service, who had nuns that spoke so many languages. So they're the Catholic order, but the United Church had a presence. All the denominations had a presence. The Jewish Immigrant Aid Society was down here. And everybody would help everyone, but they would have a list of the people of their faith that they could keep an eye out for and check in with to make sure they had everything they needed before they got on the train.
I often say Canada used to have the best social safety net, the church. They used to look after people and make sure.
We were really lucky to have so many staff and volunteers.
Yes.
That could come in and before the renovations, they walked through with the historians and described what happened where in the physical space. And at that time, NASCAD had moved into the detention quarters, so we still had access to those in behind where the theater is now. So it was just a joy. So we had this photograph. So this is from when the Hungarian Revolution refugees were coming, and local people who spoke Hungarian came down to volunteer as translators to help facilitate that. And this lady, Juliana Wolf, was in this photograph, and we had the photograph, and then she came to visit, and she gave us this ribbon. So it's just right here in this case. And a lady who worked at the same building. So at that time, before the museum opened, our offices were on Brunswick Street, and a lady who happened to work in the same office building, called Ingrid Shellnet, had come through as a little girl and been gifted this little cradle and doll, and kept it all those years, and then gave it to us to have for the museum. Wonderful. And these are more Wetmore photographs. He just really likes sleepy children sleeping on luggage.
Okay. It's an amazing place. And we're back out at the beginning.
Yep. And we didn't stop to do it, but there's we've been collecting so many interviews with people. There's oral history stations all over the place, so when people want to go deeper, they can listen to stories. But anybody who, writes or calls or emails can just give, a ship and a date and say, like, what do you have from somebody who was on that ship? And sometimes we have a story, sometimes a picture, sometimes menus that people have donated over the years. You just never know. So it's always good to ask.
It's amazing what people keep.
most of so the cutoff is 1935 for immigration records, but then there's other sources. So British departure records are public from 1890 to 1960.
Yep.
Beautiful, gorgeous records. And most of the Dutch ships gave out souvenir passenger lists. So we've been collecting them for over 25 years and indexing them. So it's nothing for us to throw a name in that database just in case we get lucky, and then you could get the whole passenger list.
Wow.
Yeah. The historic records are great, but the post-war anecdotal material is gold too.
Oh, it's
And we were so motivated to build that collection because it's really hard when people come in and want an immigration record and you have to tell them they're too young.
Yeah.
You're too young for us to have it. You can get it, but here's this. Not this, but this. So that's what we're always trying to do.
Yes, especially for people who probably most times are told they're too old for things. What a great place.
It's a great place to, like, just look at that. And I get to see the sunrise every morning. And once a couple of years ago, a perfect rainbow formed over George's Island, like exactly over George's Island. And I've seen whales twice. And people who immigrated through here have, like, literally their kids have come back. And we've arranged for ships, sailboats, to take them out to scatter the ashes in the harbor.
Wow.
Like, that's how closely some people associate the beginning of their Canadian story with this geographic spot.
And in a way, what more beautiful place can you have to say this is where it began?
Yeah. Sorry, that's just the back of the donation box.
No, that's important. So this is run by the government, it's a federal museum, but you still rely on a lot of donations for individuals.
Yes. So we've always sold the Sobey Wall of Honor bricks so that people could put a relative's name on, and people do that lots of times. The kids all chip in to commemorate the anniversary of the arrival, or a big birthday, or a wedding anniversary. So I don't know if you shot downstairs, but that's all those bricks on the wall. And do you want to just come over here for 1 second? Because we filled up, we never thought we would, but we filled up all those walls downstairs with bricks. So this is one of our most important fundraisers. And then now we're starting to do them here on this wall right across from the view that we were just talking about. And it's wonderful because the name is there forever, and the families can put a story and a photograph on the virtual wall of honor. So I always tell people the name means something to the family, but with a story and a picture, it means something to everybody.